Some countries thought they could survive without Filipinos. They believed replacing us would be easy, cheaper labor, robots, or their own citizens stepping up. But they were wrong. One by one, nations discovered the hard truth. When Filipinos leave, systems collapse. Hospitals run short of nurses. Households break down. Even global trade slows. And now we have proof. 10 more countries that tried to replace Filipinos and failed miserably. If you're proud to be Filipino, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and type respect in the comments, because by the end of this video, you'll see why the world can't ignore us anymore. 1. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is one of the largest employers of overseas Filipino workers, with over 1.5 million Filipinos having lived and worked there across industries, especially healthcare, construction, and domestic service. But in the early 2000s, and again during the 2010s, Saudi Arabia pushed a program called Saudization. The idea was simple: reduce dependence on foreign workers and put more Saudi nationals into jobs long dominated by Filipinos. At first, it seemed like a patriotic plan. Why rely on outsiders when you can employ your own citizens? The government even introduced policies that limited foreign hires in some roles. Many believed local Saudis would quickly adapt to nursing, caregiving, and service jobs once incentives were given. But then reality hit hard. Hospitals started noticing severe staff shortages. Filipino nurses and caregivers had always taken on night shifts, ICU rotations, and rural postings that locals were reluctant to accept. A 2023 Arab News report admitted the country faces a shortage of 185,000 nurses by 2030, a gap once filled largely by Filipinos. Without them, wait times for patients increased, workloads for remaining staff doubled, and the quality of care visibly dropped. The same failure showed up in homes. Many Saudi families tried hiring replacements from South Asia or Africa after Filipinos declined contracts during certain disputes. But households soon complained that language and cultural barriers created difficulties in caregiving. Filipinos were preferred not just for skill, but for their patience, adaptability, and trustworthiness. Employers admitted that even when replacements were cheaper, the hidden costs, stress, miscommunication, retraining were far higher. Eventually, Saudi Arabia had to backtrack. It eased hiring restrictions and negotiated with Manila to ensure a steady flow of Filipino workers. When the Philippines temporarily banned deployments over worker abuse concerns, Saudi hospitals and families panicked, lobbying to bring them back. In the end, Saudi Arabia learned the hard truth. Its healthcare system and household economy are so deeply tied to Filipinos that they cannot be replaced, no matter how much local policy tries to. This failure revealed a bigger lesson. Filipinos aren't just workers in Saudi Arabia, they are the invisible backbone of its society. 2. Kuwait. Kuwait's history with Filipino workers has been both long and turbulent. For decades, tens of thousands of Filipinos served as domestic helpers, caregivers, and nurses across Kuwaiti households and hospitals. By the mid-2010s, Filipinos had gained a reputation as some of the most trusted and dependable migrant workers in the country. But in 2018, everything exploded. That year, the horrific case of Joanna Demafelis, a Filipina domestic worker whose body was discovered in a freezer after being abused by her employers, shocked the world. The Philippine government responded by imposing a deployment ban on workers headed to Kuwait. Almost overnight, thousands of Filipino domestic helpers were barred from entering. Kuwait attempted to replace them by hiring from other nations, including Ethiopia, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Officials insisted that the labor shortage could be managed. But the backlash was immediate. Kuwaiti families, especially those with elderly members, publicly complained that the substitutes lacked the professionalism and trustworthiness Filipinos were known for. Many households reported miscommunication due to language barriers. Others pointed out that replacements had higher turnover rates, leaving contracts unfinished. In fact, some Kuwaitis began appealing directly to the government, demanding the return of Filipinos. The crisis went beyond households. International media covered the deployment ban widely, damaging Kuwait's reputation and putting pressure on its government. By April 2018, Kuwait was forced into diplomatic negotiations with the Philippines, resulting in a labor pact that gave Filipinos stronger protections, including the right to keep their passports, use cell phones, and access assistance in times of abuse. In other words, the ban forced Kuwait to improve conditions for Filipinos because they realized they couldn't replace them. But here's where it stings for Kuwait. Even after agreements were signed, many Filipinos remained hesitant to return in large numbers, fearing abuse. Recruitment agencies reported that families were offering higher salaries and better benefits to entice Filipinos back while still struggling with shortages. Kuwait learned the painful truth. Without Filipinos, its domestic care system nearly collapsed. if you believe Kuwait should have treated Filipinos with respect long before this crisis, type respect in the comments. Let's remind the world that Filipinos are not disposable, they're essential. 3. Qatar. Qatar has long relied on Filipino workers, especially in healthcare, hospitality, construction, and aviation. Filipinos have been the backbone of Qatar Airways, its booming hotel sector, and even its hospitals. But in the years leading up to the 2022 FIFA World Cup, Qatar attempted to diversify its labor force. The idea was to reduce dependence on Filipinos and replace them with cheaper workers from South Asia, India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. On paper, the move looked like a cost-cutting masterstroke. But the reality was very different. Employers and families quickly began noticing differences. In hospitals, patients complained of language barriers with new staff who lacked English fluency. In hotels and airlines, service quality dipped, leading to lower customer satisfaction ratings. Qatar Airways, known for its world-class hospitality, faced reports of inconsistent service because Filipino crews, praised for their adaptability and professionalism, were being scaled back in favor of cost-saving replacements. Construction also exposed cracks. While South Asian laborers formed the majority of Qatar's workforce, the management, supervisors, and technical staff, often Filipinos, were irreplaceable. Many contractors admitted privately that projects stalled without Filipino engineers and foremen who brought both discipline and communication skills. Cutting down on Filipinos didn't lower costs, it increased mistakes, delays, and rework. But here's the kicker. When Qatar's healthcare system tried to reduce Filipino nurses, shortages grew worse. A 2023 report on Gulf labor shortages confirmed that demand for Filipino healthcare workers remained the highest despite recruitment from other regions. Patients trusted Filipinos because of their empathy and ability to communicate clearly, qualities that couldn't be taught in a crash course. Then Qatar realized its mistake. After the World Cup, the government quietly ramped up its recruitment of Filipinos again, especially in aviation and healthcare. The replacements hadn't worked. Service ratings had dipped, projects had slowed, and morale had fallen. Filipinos weren't just another option, they were the standard. The lesson for Qatar was painful but undeniable. Cheaper doesn't mean better. Replacing Filipinos might save money in the short term, but in the long run, it costs far more in quality, reputation, and trust. If you believe Qatar should admit that Filipinos are the gold standard in global industries, type visible in the comments. Let's make sure the world sees the truth that can no longer be hidden. Morning, United Arab Emirates. The United Arab Emirates has long been one of the top destinations for Filipinos. With over 700,000 Filipinos living and working in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and other Emirates, they've become vital in industries like aviation, healthcare, education, and hospitality. Filipinos aren't just workers there. They've helped shape the UAE into the global hub it is today. But there was a time when the UAE thought it could cut back on Filipino workers and replace them with cheaper alternatives. At first, it seemed practical. With rising costs, companies recruited more workers from South Asia and Africa, especially in hospitality and healthcare. Employers believed they could lower expenses while still keeping operations smooth. Some even thought the Philippines was too demanding with its labor protections and bans, so it would be safer to diversify. But then cracks began to show. In hospitals, English communication became a serious problem. Filipino nurses had always been praised for their ability to bridge cultures, speaking English clearly while offering empathy and patience. When replacements took over, patients noticed the difference. Complaints rose, and retention of foreign staff outside Filipinos plummeted. In airlines like Emirates and Etihad, service quality took a hit when fewer Filipinos were on board. A 2024 review of Gulf Airlines staffing trends noted that Filipino crew members consistently ranked among the highest in customer satisfaction surveys, with travelers praising their professionalism and warmth. Without them, customer loyalty dipped. The construction sector told a similar story. While the majority of laborers were non-Filipinos, supervisors, foremen, and technical staff from the Philippines often kept projects on schedule. Companies that tried replacing them faced higher rework costs and project delays. Quietly, many firms began requesting Filipinos again for management-level positions on work sites. Then came the admission. By 2023, UAE government labor data showed that Filipino workers were still among the most demanded nationalities, particularly in healthcare and hospitality. Employers realized what they'd lost when they tried to cut down: consistency, reliability, and trust. They went back to hiring Filipinos, often at better wages, because they had no choice if they wanted to maintain their global reputation as a world-class destination. The UAE learned what others already knew. Filipinos aren't an expense, they're an investment. If you believe the UAE should value Filipinos not just as workers, but as partners in its success, type essential in the comments. Let's remind the world that without Filipinos, even the richest nations struggle. 5. Japan. Japan is one of the most advanced nations in the world, famous for its technology, infrastructure, and discipline. Yet beneath the shining neon lights of Tokyo lies a growing crisis, an aging population that Japan cannot handle on its own. With nearly 29% of its people over 65 years old, in 2025, Japan faces a shortage of caregivers and healthcare workers unlike anything the world has seen. At first, Japan believed it could manage without too much foreign help. For decades, the country was cautious about allowing outsiders into its workforce, believing automation and robotics could fill the gap. In fact, Japan invested billions into AI caregiving robots, hoping to avoid reliance on migrants. Policymakers thought the country's high-tech solutions would be enough, but then the reality set in. Elderly patients didn't want robots, they wanted compassion, patience, and human interaction. Families quickly realized machines could lift a patient, but they couldn't replace the empathy and warmth that caregiving required. Meanwhile, local Japanese youth avoided the hard, low-paying work of caregiving. Even generous subsidies couldn't attract enough applicants. By 2023, Japan admitted a staggering 370,000 caregiver shortfall would persist unless foreign workers filled the roles. That's when Filipinos became the answer. Under the Japan-Philippines Economic Partnership Agreement, JPEPA, thousands of Filipino nurses and caregivers were invited to work in Japan. At first, many wondered if language and cultural barriers would be an issue, but Filipinos adapted quickly, learning Japanese, respecting traditions, and providing care that locals praised. Japanese families began specifically requesting Filipino caregivers for their compassion and skill. But here's the kicker. Japan's initial hesitation meant it lost precious time. By trying to solve its crisis without Filipinos, it only made the shortage worse. Today, Japanese officials openly acknowledge that Filipinos are critical to the survival of their healthcare and elderly care systems. Robots didn't save them, Filipinos did. The lesson for Japan was simple. Technology is powerful, but humanity is irreplaceable. And Filipinos embody that humanity. If you believe Japan should give more recognition to Filipinos who are literally saving its aging population, type humanity in the comments, because compassion can't be programmed, it comes from the Filipino heart. 6. Hong Kong. For decades, Hong Kong has been one of the most popular destinations for Filipino domestic helpers. With over 200,000 Filipinos working there as caregivers, nannies, and household staff, they became the backbone of family life in one of Asia's busiest cities. Families relied on Filipinos not only for household chores, but for raising children, caring for the elderly, and providing stability in homes where both parents often worked full-time. First, Hong Kong officials believed they could diversify. Rising tensions in the mid-2010s led to recruitment drives in countries like Indonesia, Myanmar, and Thailand. The goal was to reduce reliance on Filipinos who were becoming more organized and vocal about labor rights. Hong Kong wanted cheaper workers and believed alternatives could easily fill the gap. But then families started speaking out. Parents and elderly residents repeatedly emphasized that Filipinos were different. Their English fluency made them effective in teaching children, helping with homework, and bridging communication in a global city like Hong Kong. Employers also noted that Filipinos had built trust over decades. They were seen as reliable, patient, and deeply family-oriented. Other workers may have been cheaper on paper, but hidden costs emerged: communication breakdowns, shorter contract completion rates, and higher turnover. In 2019, during Hong Kong's political unrest, this became even clearer. Many households leaned heavily on their Filipino helpers who stayed calm and dependable even in uncertain times. Employers admitted that losing Filipinos during those periods would have created chaos, especially for households with children and elderly members. Then came the realization. Despite its efforts to diversify, Hong Kong still relies overwhelmingly on Filipino helpers. Recruitment agencies quietly reported that employers specifically requested Filipinos over other nationalities because of trust, loyalty, and cultural adaptability. By 2025, Hong Kong's own labor department acknowledged that the majority of its foreign domestic workforce remained Filipino, showing that attempts to replace them had failed. The lesson was undeniable. In a city that runs on speed and trust, Filipinos had become irreplaceable. They weren't just workers, they were part of the family fabric of Hong Kong. If you believe Hong Kong should give more credit to Filipinos who have helped raise its future generations, type loyalty in the comments. Because trust like this isn't bought, it's earned, and Filipinos have earned it. 7. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom prides itself on the National Health Service, NHS, one of the largest public healthcare systems in the world. But behind the curtain, the NHS has been facing one of the worst staffing shortages in its history. By 2024, official reports confirmed the NHS was short of over 120,000 staff, including more than 40,000 nurses. That crisis exposed one undeniable truth. Without Filipinos, the NHS would crumble. At first, Britain thought it could solve the shortage by recruiting locally. The government invested in campaigns to encourage British citizens to train as nurses and healthcare assistants. It also widened recruitment drives to Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. Officials believed this mix would ease the pressure. But then the reality hit. Fewer locals were signing up. Nursing was viewed as underpaid, overstressed, and undervalued work. Many young Britons simply didn't want it. Meanwhile, Brexit complicated the pipeline of healthcare workers from Europe. Recruitment from other regions faced language, training, and cultural adaptation challenges. That's when the Philippines quietly stepped in and took the lead. As of 2024, more than 40,000 Filipino nurses were officially registered with the NHS, making them one of the single largest foreign-born groups in the system. In hospitals across London, Manchester, Birmingham, and beyond, Filipinos weren't just filling shifts, they were running entire wards. British patients often praised their kindness, professionalism, and communication skills. Doctors admitted privately that their hospitals would not function without Filipino staff. But the UK also tried to reduce reliance. In some years, it cut recruitment quotas from the Philippines, hoping to balance with other nationalities. The result? Gaps open again. In fact, a Royal College of Nursing 2023 report confirmed that overseas recruitment, particularly from the Philippines and India, was absolutely essential to keeping the NHS alive. Then the confession came. By 2025, British health leaders openly acknowledged that without Filipino nurses, the NHS would face collapse. Replacing them was not only impossible, it was dangerous. If you believe the UK should honor Filipino nurses who are holding up its entire healthcare system, type honor in the comments. Let the world know Filipinos deserve more than thanks. They deserve respect and recognition. Aim Canada. Canada is known for its quality of life, universal healthcare, and welcoming immigration policies. But behind the scenes, the country is in the middle of a demographic crisis. By 2025, nearly 1 in 5 Canadians is over 65 years old, and projections show that by 2050, almost 30% of the population will be seniors. That means skyrocketing demand for nurses, caregivers, and healthcare assistants, a demand Canada simply cannot meet with its local workforce. At first, Canadian policymakers thought they could handle the crisis internally. They launched campaigns to attract young Canadians into healthcare professions and even raise salaries for nurses. The government also tried to expand immigration beyond the Philippines, recruiting from Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America. On paper, this diversification looked like a long-term solution. But then the cracks appeared. Canadian youth still avoided nursing, citing burnout, long hours, and emotional strain. Recruitment from other regions was limited by training gaps and language barriers. Many foreign nurses struggled to pass Canada's strict licensing exams, delaying their entry into the workforce. Meanwhile, hospitals and long-term care facilities were drowning in shortages. That's when the Philippines once again proved irreplaceable. As of 2024, over 80,000 Filipino healthcare workers were in Canada, with tens of thousands more in the immigration pipeline. Filipinos were staffing hospitals in Toronto, caring for seniors in Vancouver, and running long-term facilities in Alberta and Manitoba. Families openly admitted that without Filipino caregivers, many elderly Canadians would be left unattended. But here's where Canada learned the hard way. In 2020, when deployment bans briefly slowed Filipino migration, Canada felt the squeeze immediately. Nursing homes reported staffing crises and patient care standards dropped. No other immigrant group could fill the gap as fast or as effectively. By 2023, Canadian policymakers finally admitted what Filipinos already knew. The system doesn't just benefit from Filipinos, it depends on them. Then came the open acknowledgement. Provincial governments launched recruitment fairs in Manila, specifically targeting Filipino workers. Canada stopped pretending it could replace them and started actively courting them. Filipinos weren't a backup plan, they were the lifeline. If you believe Canada should give more than just jobs, but genuine recognition and leadership opportunities for Filipinos, type lifeline in the comments, because Filipinos aren't just filling gaps in Canada. They are holding the future together. 9. Israel. Israel is one of the most unique countries in the world. Advanced, resilient, and constantly balancing security with survival. But behind its strength lies a demographic challenge, an aging population, and a growing need for caregivers. By 2025, nearly 12% of Israel's citizens are over 65, and life expectancy is among the highest in the world. The demand for long-term caregiving has surged. At first, Israel believed it could manage with local workers. Government programs encouraged Israelis to take on caregiving roles for the elderly and disabled. Officials even considered recruiting workers from Eastern Europe and Africa. They assumed a combination of local subsidies and new migrant pools would solve the issue. But then the reality became unavoidable. Most Israelis avoided these jobs, viewing them as physically demanding and emotionally draining. Those who tried often left quickly due to burnout. Meanwhile, foreign workers from other regions faced cultural and language barriers, leaving families frustrated. Many elderly patients needed not just physical assistance, but warmth, patience, and companionship, something that was missing. That's when Filipinos changed everything. By 2024, estimates showed over 30,000 Filipinos were working in Israel, most in caregiving roles. Unlike others, Filipinos blended seamlessly into Israeli households. They learned Hebrew, embraced Jewish traditions, and became more than workers. They became extended family. Families often said that Filipino caregivers treated their elderly loved ones with a level of compassion and respect unmatched by anyone else. But here's where Israel's attempt to replace Filipinos failed. Every time the government tightened visa restrictions or experimented with hiring from elsewhere, complaints soared. Families openly lobbied for Filipino caregivers, citing trust and professionalism. In fact, Israeli officials admitted in 2023 that Filipinos were the preferred caregivers in the country because of their dedication and ability to integrate into households. Then came the cultural bond. Filipinos and Israelis share a unique connection rooted in faith and resilience. That bond made Filipinos more than employees. It made them indispensable. Israel learned that caregiving isn't just labor, it's love. And that's why Filipinos couldn't be replaced. If you believe Israel should show even more appreciation for Filipinos who care for its elderly with heart and dignity, type family in the comments. Because in Israel, Filipinos aren't just workers, they've become family. The United States. The United States is the world's most powerful nation, economically, militarily, and politically. But beneath its superpower image lies a truth Washington rarely admits. America's strength has long depended on Filipinos. From healthcare and shipping to military service, Filipinos have been woven into the very fabric of U.S. society. At first, America believed it had options. With its vast population of over 330 million, the US assumed it could rely on its own citizens to meet critical labor needs. It also tapped into immigration from dozens of countries across the globe. Officials believed that with such diversity, the system would never rely too heavily on one nationality. But then the facts became undeniable. In healthcare, Filipinos make up the largest group of foreign-born nurses in the US, over 150,000 strong as of 2024. In states like California, New York, and Texas, hospitals admit they could not function without Filipino nurses. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a disproportionate number of Filipino nurses died on the front lines because they made up such a large share of the workforce, a sacrifice the US still struggles to acknowledge. Without Filipinos, America's healthcare system would buckle under its own weight. And it doesn't end there. In shipping, nearly 30% of the world's seafarers are Filipino, many working on US-linked cargo routes. Without them, supply chains collapse. In the military, tens of thousands of Filipinos have served under the US flag, from World War II's Battle of Bataan to modern deployments. Even today, Filipino immigrants continue to enlist, forming an essential part of America's defense system. But here's the kicker. Every attempt to reduce Filipino reliance backfires. When US hospitals cut recruitment from the Philippines, staffing shortages spiked. When call centers experimented with outsourcing elsewhere, customer satisfaction dropped. Even in the military, veterans groups acknowledge Filipinos' loyalty and service as unmatched. America may be a superpower, but without Filipinos, it would be a weakened giant. Then comes the confession. While it rarely makes headlines, US healthcare leaders, logistics companies, and even military historians admit the same thing. Filipinos are not optional in America's story. They are essential. If you believe America should finally give full recognition to the Filipinos who've sacrificed, served, and saved its systems, type power in the comments. Because even the strongest nation in the world cannot stand without Filipinos.